There we go. And then we don't normally have a third chorus, but we are going to have one more this morning. It's called Redeemed.
Redeemed, how I love to proclaim it, redeemed by the blood of the Lamb, redeemed through his infinite mercy, his child, and forever I am. Redeemed, redeemed, redeemed by the blood of the Lamb, redeemed, how I love to proclaim it, his child, and forever I am. Redeemed and so happy in Jesus, no language my rapture can tell. I know that the light of his presence with me doth continually dwell. Redeemed, redeemed, redeemed by the blood of the Lamb, redeemed, how I love to proclaim it, his child, and forever I am. I think of my blessed Redeemer, I think of him all the day long. I sing, for I cannot be silent, his love is the theme of my song. Redeemed, redeemed, redeemed by the blood of the Lamb, redeemed, how I love to proclaim it, his child, forever I am.
Thank you so much, Cliff, for those choruses. It's the best way to start a Sabbath morning in song and proclaiming our love to our Father and Creator. Before we, as I said earlier, while Cliff was away, we are no longer, well, we're doing, it's a trial run, we are no longer doing our Sabbath school talk from a guest speaker. We want to try and spend more time on the lesson study. So once again, if you feel it doesn't work, just let us know. But I do feel that we need to spend more time in learning about our Father. Before we go across to Cliff, I also just want to ask that we please keep the church and the families in Somerset West in our prayer. There's a raging fire there at the moment. In fact, it's less than a kilometer away from my sister's house. So it's threatening both Erinvale as well as Lawrenceford wine estates. And I don't know if you know Somerset West, but that's literally within the community of Somerset West. So let's just keep them in our prayers as well. But we're going to hand over now to our lesson study facilitator, Cliff. Cliff, I'm going to hand over to you now.
Just a question, do we have a mission story?
Yes, you see, I'm so confused. We most certainly do.
I didn't want to be put on the spot that early.
It's just thrown by not having the talk. So yes, I'm going to share my screen and we will go across to the mission story. Let's just give me a moment. Where am I? There we go.
Studies show that all over the world, the older population is growing, and in many societies, seniors spend most of their days alone. There are many effects of isolation: stress, depression, an increase in unhealthy habits like smoking, drinking, and neglect of physical activity, and a risk of quicker mental decline due to the lack of stimulation. As we strive to reach people in urban areas under the Mission to the Cities initiative, how can we connect with this group that spends a majority of their time in isolation? What can one do to serve the seniors in the cities? A church in Vancouver, Canada, started a seniors garden after the pastor heard about a local couple who had their own special garden. This couple was experiencing loneliness and disconnection, and so they started a We Grow, You Pick garden in their front yard to connect with their neighbors. This successful project was the starting point for a large garden at a local Adventist church. Projects like this can provide seniors with a place to come together and mingle with one another while working toward a common goal. In South Korea, members of the Seoul Central Church are caring for the elderly by running a senior citizen ministry. The church provides food to the elderly every Sabbath and extends their help even further by providing bus fare for the trip to and from the church every other week. What were Ellen White's thoughts on the elderly? In the book, The Ministry of Healing, she writes, "There is a blessing in the association of the old and the young. The young may bring sunshine into the hearts and lives of the aged. Those whose hold on life is weakening need the benefit and contact with the hopefulness and buoyancy of youth." In Pennsylvania, members of a church provide lawn and yard care to seniors who are homeowners and unable to care for their yards on their own. There are many opportunities to serve seniors in the cities, from providing basic home repairs to offering exercise programs and outings meant specifically for the elderly. Visit the Mission to the Cities website for more ideas on how to serve your city's most vulnerable residents. Following Christ's method of ministry and filled with His Spirit, you can impact someone's life today. Please pray for the ongoing work of reaching the unreached. Thank you for supporting Mission to the Cities.
That is such a wonderful initiative. And I know that we at Advent Hope Online is also looking at ways that we can reach the old people. So if you have any ideas, please let us know. It's not as easy as just going into an old age home and doing a ministry there. Advent Hope Online is a Zoom platform, so it is a little bit more difficult. But there are so many old people out there who just need somebody to hold their hand and to talk to. We've got a member on our platform too, Tani Olof. Her site is given in totally as of Thursday, so she can't even click onto our links anymore to join us with our programs. So it's something as small as reaching out to somebody in the old age home to help her with it. But not all government old age homes are geared to being able to really help the old people. So let us just keep all of them in our prayers, and let us all do our own little bit in helping the people around us. But now it is time to go across to Cliff. Cliff, thank you so much for our lesson study. So I'm going to hand over to you now.
Okay, thank you so much, Cecilia. Let's bow our heads in prayer and start with the Lord here with us. Our dear Father in heaven, thank you so much that we can gather here on this virtual platform. Thank you for the people that have joined us today, especially Dave and Carol, Griffey, who are our friends with Share in a moment, and the others that have joined, the regular members. Thank you so much for their continued support on this platform. Lord, we bring before you this lesson study and our discussion. We know that there are various things you want us to learn and discover individually, and we look forward to a good discussion. And I pray for your blessing on each of us as we contemplate these thoughts and themes that we're going to discuss now. I pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. Okay, so when we go through the book of Genesis and the different stories that are in the lesson study, I think one of the things we actually do have is a sense of the fact that we've actually heard these stories before. So what more can we learn out of them? And I took a bit of a different approach today, in the sense that I'd like to I think Cher knows by now, and some of the people I work with and so on. I like to look at the big picture of what I'm seeing, and try and understand the dynamics and the forces and the actual interplay of things. And I'm going to hijack the memory verse that is in the lesson study and replace it with Amos 3 verse 7, which is actually reads, "Surely the sovereign Lord does nothing without revealing his plan to his servants, the prophets." Now, in the story of Joseph, I'm actually seeing this verse applying in two different ways. The one is definitely the Lord did reveal stuff to Joseph and the people involved, but the other thing is it was his plan. So here's the big thing about the lesson approach that I'm going to take today. And you know, there are two ways to look at a story in the Bible and other stories as well. The one is to be in there with Joseph, and you get the blows that he's getting, and you get thrown into the pit, and so on and so on. The other way is to actually stand like 10 meters or 20 meters away from the story and say, oh, what's going on here? And you look at it as an observer from a high level. So my first question to you is, how do you think God was actually using Joseph to achieve his big plan? So the question is, what was God's big plan with Joseph's story as part of that plan? So my first question to you is, what is and was God's big plan? And yeah, I really would like participation. So Cher, you can unmute that microphone and see if we can hear you guys. And then Trevor, Pedro, Deduza, Jeanette, Cecilia, praat met my asseblief.
Can you hear us?
What was God's big plan? Yes, I can hear you.
I think the biggest plan is that he had to bring Messiah for the redemption of humanity for everything. And then I think he was sort of hoping on a micro level to redeem all those brothers who hated their brother.
Sorry, just say the last bit. You were hoping.
On a macro level, I think it was to bring Messiah for the redemption of everything. And then on a micro level, I think it was to redeem the brothers who hated Joseph. And probably redeem Joseph.
Yeah. Any other comments, Cecilia?
Yeah, I think it was also, God knew that the famine was coming and that his people will need help as well. And also just within Joseph's own life, to make him realize that there's nothing that he can do on his own. Throughout Joseph's life, he had to depend on God and through prayer. And it didn't happen overnight. There were years between God answering his prayers. So that continuous praying and continuously keeping close to God.
Trevor, any thoughts there?
Not yet, Cliff, not yet.
Good, thank you, my brother. Yeah, I don't want to pick on anyone, so I like your pushback. Cecilia, did God know the famine was coming, or did he plan the famine that was coming?
Cliff, God allows things to happen. I don't know if he planned the famine. He certainly used the famine to further his plan.
You know, that's a softy approach, Cecilia. It's like, oh, God will never do stuff that will damage anything. I think he planned the famine. He planned the 7 years of really good whatever, that God would do, right? That's definitely what God would do. So why not plan the famine? And in the big picture, the famine actually brought Jacob to Egypt. So anyway, that's a big debate. Anyone, Dave? Any ideas there? Does God plan famines?
No, I don't. Yeah, whether he planned it or didn't plan it, it's immaterial. But he did use it. The crazy thing about the Lord is that he could have used, with a click of his fingers, he could have sorted things out. But the way he works is that he uses humans.
Okay, that's a nice new.
He moved humans into the place and space that he required to further future goals.
Okay.
So none of those people were aware of the future plans, the long-term plans that he had. But Joseph was a man of God, and God could trust him to put him into a certain space, and then use him to further his goals for a long-term plan. So it wasn't just a famine. The famine was just a short-term thing to make sure that Egypt and that whole central world was put under the control of a godly person. And when he did that, then he furthered his plans even further. Of course, Moses down the line coming in, taking his people away. All of those future plans were all set in motion by one person that was faithful to God. So it's amazing that God uses those people and all the and how He can use us, even though we don't know what the long-term plan is. All we've got to do is be faithful in this kind of our part, and long-term will take care of itself.
Awesome. Thanks, Dave. That's really in line with what I was hoping to achieve this morning. So God's really big plan was firstly to deal with the sin problem. So, there was sin in heaven, then there was creation, then there was sin on earth. His biggest plan was to bring Jesus to earth, to achieve his awesome goals and achievements, and then have this new creation of humans with the Holy Spirit living in them, and really just becoming living examples of what it is like to have Jesus and God, the effect of humans and God actually exhibiting what true principles of God's kingdom are. And then finally just ridding the universe forever of sin. So those I see are the big stones. There was sin, then there was creation, bringing this awesomeness of humanity into the universe, and then sin, then Jesus, then the solution to the sin problem. So it's quite amazing. My thoughts on the big picture with Joseph was firstly that he would influence the highest and biggest world's best civilization with someone like Joseph, who was really just an example of what it's all about. And then secondly, he wanted to grow the nation of Israel, so that the promise of Abraham and so on would happen. And this was the incubation of that nation. I found it very interesting that only 70 people from Jacob's family and everyone except the wives amounted to 70 people. And then it grew into this massive nation, but it did take about 430 years. So that was, and then once again, he uses the most unlikely person to achieve his huge goals and ambitions. So I don't want to pick on this too much, but did God design the whole thing? You know, did God actually design through the dreams of Joseph that he would be hated? And then he would actually go into slavery. I mean, look at how that happened. And then he wouldn't go to anybody as a slave, he would go to Potiphar. Now, Potiphar was a skilled, highly trained, capable statesman. And Joseph learned a lot from Potiphar about, nations and how to do things and strategy. And in a way, Joseph going to Potiphar's house actually was his training to do the rest of what he did finally. And then, okay, the sexual advances from Potiphar's wife weren't God's plan. But that kicked him into prison. I think there would have been another way to achieve it. But eventually, Joseph becoming a leader in Egypt, and finally, Jacob and his family coming to Egypt. I think that whole thing was God's design. But we can debate the aspects of whether God designs bad things sometimes. But, Trevor.
And that's a softy approach, Cliff. If you know what I mean.
Straight back at me, right? I know what you mean, my brother. Yeah. So anyway, let's just jump to the next part of what I really want to look at. There are quite a few things I want to focus on. The factor of dreams. It seems to be that dreams, I don't know if you really want to touch on, just go back to this whole thing, but we'll break it down further, the aspect of Joseph, what I just used, the softy approach. Any comments on dreams? Dreams played a very big role in the story of Joseph and in other parts of the Bible. Any comments from anybody, reflections? How do you figure the dreams of Joseph? Where people will bow to him and...
You think dreams are were only used in the Bible and not used today? Can you see any examples of God using dreams today?
Well, Dave, your question provokes an answer from you, please.
So the only reason I'm saying that is because there's in the Islam community, there's a huge uprising of dreams of Jesus showing himself to people in dreams, in visions. It's quite a big thing. It's huge now. It's become massive. So when you say, going back to your previous question, does God intervene in our lives and people's lives? Most definitely. And I think it's when we stop doing our work, where we are too afraid to go to, maybe, he steps in eventually and says, well, I have
even
to
the stones.
There's a guy, I just can't think of his name, but he worked with Ravi Zacharias on his ministry team. And he's a guy that Jesus came to envision. And he has now a huge, massive following in the Christian life. Well, he died actually.
Ravi, yeah.
No.
Oh, the other.
Yeah.
Oh, the other person. Okay.
Yeah. Just can't remember his name, but he was saying, and I've listened to a whole bunch of his talks about how a lot of people have received visions, dreams, and are now converting. Not en masse, but he's having leaders kind of popping up all over the place and sharing, which is a life-threatening thing to do in the Islam community.
Yeah, yeah.
I think he still uses dreams now, and specifically in that case, he needed to tell the future.
Mhm.
Whenever God does that, he does that in visions and in dreams to people.
You know, it struck me when I was, sorry, Dave. Yeah,
Okay,
it struck me when I was contemplating God using dreams, right? And Dave, I'm well aware of what you're saying, and I find that really wonderful. But yeah, yes, perhaps a similarity between when God used dreams in the past and now again. When God gave dreams to the time in the stream of time, when God gave dreams to people like Joseph and to Daniel and so on, the Bible didn't really exist then. The way God spoke to people and the way that the knowledge of God was disseminated was through by word of mouth and stories told to children and so on. So how would God actually communicate his will and especially his to Daniel and so on? And here again to the Muslims and to some of the Jews and so on, they aren't really exposed to the Bible at that point. So here God intervenes in what is a dream is a bit of a miraculous thing, in my opinion. It's something which is inserted in your brain from God himself. So there's something quite awesome in the impact. The interesting thing about dreams as well on the other side is that we dream. I mean, I don't know about you, but I dream virtually every night, and it's in Technicolor. So I think my brain is still working reasonably well. But most of what I dream is absolute nonsense. In fact, I don't even remember it the next day. I do remember that I was actually really sort of trying to invent something last night in my dreams. I wish I remembered what it was because it was really great. But yeah, so I don't want to dwell on this too long, but I do think that God actually does use dreams. And an interesting question is, can Satan give you dreams? Can Satan influence your mind from outside?
Sorry, Cher, go ahead.
So you go ahead, sir.
I was going to say, I don't believe the devil can, but what he does do is he influences our environments and what we do within our environment. And then we tend to dream about these horrible things, the movies we've watched, the books we've read, the people we've been mingling with, and that comes into our brain because we haven't asked the Holy Spirit to protect us from these things. So I think that is the way the devil affects us.
I think you're right. Share just before you answer. Trevor, I saw you unmute.
Yeah, you've provoked a bit of thinking in my head, Cliff. If we go back to your the hijacked verse, Amos 3 verse 7, you said, surely the sovereign Lord does nothing without revealing his plans, without first revealing his plans. I've just noticed now all the dreams, the great dreams and visions of the various prophets in the Bible. It seems that those dreams and visions were given to outline the macro global events. For instance, Joseph, it was a macro global event, and it affected the world's population. If you think of John, the Revelator, Daniel, it's all those dreams and visions, although they're in the Bible, they're actually eternal messages, everlasting messages for us. So I see the dreams and visions not as frivolous things that God gives us, or the significance thereof, but he gives it for a great purpose.
Good comment, Trevor. Thanks very much. And I'm just going back to share now.
I think that God is exceptionally kind. As much as there's a macro vision, imagine growing up being hated by your brothers because basically your father didn't plan to marry their mother. And that pain must have been there for a long time. And so being sold into slavery, like you think to yourself, because you've been really close to your dad, you're like his favorite. Now you're separated from the few people that you do love into slavery. I believe God's desire for Joseph particularly was to give him hope through those dreams. Because that hope is what actually transformed him. He believed that dream. If you read other writings in Judaism, he clung to those dreams because those dreams were a promise to him. So yeah, as much as my mind washes itself during REM sleep and comes up with absolute garbage, and sometimes we have dreams that we just don't remember, those are not the kind of dreams. God's medium is through the dreams that we have. And I know some people who very definitely had prophetic dreams warning them of what will happen the next day. A missionary friend of ours could see himself walking to his aeroplane, and God said to him, "Don't take your plane, take the old plane." And he was like, "Oh, the old plane has to be serviced and whatever." And someone else took that plane and crashed, and they survived. And how God definitely still speaks. But I think we need to remember that it's usually stuff that he can't tell through his word, or he can't tell through his people, that God resorts to that. And the reason for the dreams is hope. I mean, we believe faith, hope, and love. When we trust God, it's one thing, but hope can be truly eroded. And the time is coming for all of us. We're holding on to those hopes, the hopes of those visions and prophecies that God has promised will be what carries us through.
In fact, I think Ellen White refers to the fact that in the last times, there will be specific dreams. Old men shall dream dreams and so on. So I'm waiting until that time for myself, but that's all good. So, Share?
Cliff?
Oh, Dave, okay.
Yeah, you. No one took you up on your Satan influencing your dreams.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I don't know who hasn't
Cecilia did
read the
mention
Bible.
some.
Demons can possess your body and make you do the most horrendous things. If we think of the demoniac and all the other stories that we've heard and read, Satan can most definitely get in your head. He can influence your dreams, he can influence your body, he can take over your body. It's a very scary thing for that to happen. I don't wish that on my worst enemy. I definitely think that he can influence our dreams. If he can take over your body, he can definitely take over your mind. And crazy. I mean, just the way things are going and the leadership of the world, the things that are around us, we can definitely see that influence.
Thanks, Dave. Thanks, Dave. I think that's a very sobering thing to just pause on, and I would like to just pause there for a minute, because I do think, and I do believe that Satan taking over somebody is not an incidental event. I think there's some sort of release of yourself to Satan, which then, does that. But I'm not sure of the dynamics of that. And perhaps that is something really worth looking at. How does God allow Satan to take over somebody? Yeah, that's a very sobering. Is there another comment there from Shay? Or I see you've unmuted.
I think we need to understand how Satan works. When someone is traumatized, let's say I am physically or sexually abused by somebody, as we've been talking this week, my soul can remain pure. Despite the fact that I'm psychologically damaged, the fact that I am hurt and harmed, I can choose to allow sin to spill over into me and hatred to grow towards that person. Or I can choose otherwise. And what we don't realize is that every single choice we make is either for good or for evil. Whether it is a conscious or a subconscious choice. And that's why healing has to be such a deliberate choosing. You cannot just embark on that healing and forgiveness. What she was saying last night is that forgiveness comes at a personal cost. It actually requires self-sacrifice for me to forgive somebody who has hurt me and harmed me. And that can only happen, you know, when Jesus says, it's probably for me one of the most profound things he says when he says, you are the salt of the earth. Salt in that time to those people was used for two things. When they went to the bathroom, they would throw salt on that because they didn't have a toilet system like ours to prevent disease from spreading. And it was also there for the preservation and the taste of food. And that is what we are called as God's agents on the planet, is to prevent the spread of evil, to resist it, as well as to do what is good. You can't do what is good and stay silent about what is evil. And the problem that we face with Satan is that when we are doing neither of them, we are in his camp, either one of them. So what happens with like the people who become demonically possessed, and I know enough of them. I have personal friends who really physically battle demons. Is that you find this where the rest of us are generally afraid, let's be honest. Most of us won't go into somebody's house with his blood on the walls and that people are scratched. Cliff and I have personal experience with our neighbors with that. We couldn't get a minister in our church to come. We had to go to another church to come and pray for those people. But my point is that when Satan's modus operandi is not to have people cutting themselves and self-mutilation, although that's a massive increase, and we've seen that. But it is more of a denial of Christ as the solution. So we have this intellectual perspective, and I think that's where we have to be very careful. Satan has become far more subtle in his of how he's operating. But I think what Auntie Ellen says is right. 90% of people in mental institutions, it's not a psychological problem. It is a spiritual problem. It is a demonic problem. And I can tell you, when they fall into their sleep, that's when you hear the groaning and screaming and crying. It is a fright.
Sure. Asuna, welcome tomorrow. Thank you for joining us today. And tomorrow, anytime you want to comment, please do. Shay, would you mind just coming here for a minute? So what I'd really like to dwell on just a little more, I'm asking Shay just to come help me with the sun shining directly on my face. Am I just pulling? Yeah. Just very interesting. During winter, the sun shines at a different angle and it's radically different. So it's really quite amazing. Anyway, so the interesting thing about this, and I really would like to, a little more of that. Yeah, perfect. Thank you. What I'd really like to do is just dwell a little more on this thing about Satan's real influence and presence on the planet. I think, Dave, and thanks for just bringing it back into focus. I think it's important for us to actually realize and also keep in mind, in terms of spreading the gospel and the love of Jesus and all of that, we actually are God's ambassadors on earth to combat what Satan is achieving. And I think, you know, when you hear of people being possessed in the Bible, you wonder why there aren't these people possessed walking around that many times around here. But I think that in different levels of society, Satan is much more active and much more prevalent and really significant in the daily minute-by-minute lives of people. And I'm reminded again, as happens every now and again, that we are on different levels to other people on the planet, to each other. And I'm not saying that in a good or bad way. I'm just saying that one lives in your own environment and doesn't quite realize what happens beyond that environment. So, you know, I think some people have got some awareness of Satan's activities and so on. But I just wanted to pause a minute longer and say that this is something that perhaps God calls certain people into a specific ministry to minister to those who are in fact, you know, influenced in their daily lives. She was referring to somebody she knows. Just before COVID, we had a home church, and Dave and Carol were part of that as well. And one of the members in our home church was actually physically abused by Satan, you know, when she went to bed and so on. So these are real things and fairly close to us, and we tend to stand back and perhaps ignore what we could be doing. So it's difficult. One doesn't really know what to do, but anyway, we need to carry on to other topics. But yeah, thanks very much for that. In the lesson of this week, you know, we're looking at Joseph and so on, and then all of a sudden here's this story about Judah and Tamar in the middle of what I didn't expect. And the author seems to feel that this was an appropriate time to bring that particular incident into focus in this lesson. So I'm just going to go there quickly, but broaden it a bit. I was reading Patriarchs and Prophets, preparing for this lesson, just on the background to Joseph. And she says there, and I'm just not finding that quote right now, but she says something to the effect that the wives and concubines, that whole scenario around Jacob and Joseph, sorry. So Jacob's wives and concubines set a very bad tone to the whole life of that family. There were the jealousies, there was the bickering, there was the bad mouthing. It was, in fact, a very, very, very unhealthy environment. And one wonders about that. We saw it with Abram, Sarah, and Hagar. And you know, it seems to have been a pattern right from God's chosen people through the whole thing. So, you know, and it's, I can't understand why, or maybe, but anyway, what are the dynamics? What were the dynamics around giving your servant to your husband to get children? You know, it just sounds really weird. But anyway, this was one of the things that actually caused a whole causticness, a natural inbuilt unhappiness and frustration and so on in Joseph's brothers, and I think in Joseph himself. The whole sort of dynamics there. Does anyone have an opinion, and then we'll just go quickly to Judah and Tamar. Shasi, you've unmuted. Anybody else want to make a comment as well? But yeah, go ahead. Or Dave.
No, I think that sometimes we can do something that out of the goodness of our heart, and it just turns out bad.
So giving your concubine, giving your servant to your husband is out of the goodness of your heart. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. So she couldn't obviously she couldn't have children. So she was still continuing the line, her husband's line, but just not through her. So it's very, that's an unselfish act. But the unselfish act done in an incorrect way can have devastating consequences.
How does that? Yeah.
Surrogacy still happens today. So I think we need to understand that there are times where it was for selfish reasons and times where it was unselfish. But most of the time it backfired.
Yeah. I think in every case it backfired. What I want to touch on here, Cecilia, you have a comment?
Yeah, very much what Dave was saying too was, you know, even as growing up in a Christian family, that doesn't mean all the children are good Christians. The obvious example is the pastor's wife, the pastor's son that goes off the rails. You know, and I just look at Jacob and his family, and there's Joseph, who was a good child, and they talk about him living closely to God. Why did the others not live closely to God? You know, so they had a similar upbringing, but you've got the divergence within a family, and we still have it today. No matter how hard we try, everyone is responsible for their own relationship with God. And it is so sad to see that even in those days where we believe they didn't have the same influences as we do, but actually they did. But it's just sort of more pronounced now with being on TV constantly, the ugliness. And our children are exposed to this on all levels. But we still have it today. Nothing has really changed. It really is sad.
Yeah.
May I also just say, you know, if you think about it, love from their father also set the pace. I mean, if you're a bunch of brothers and you know that you're not the favorites, and your mother wasn't the favorite, just think about how much pain that causes.
Yeah, thinking that, oh my, I actually wasn't supposed to be here, but somebody gave their servant to my father to make me, because this very important thing of having children is overrides, and here's the point I want to make. How does this fit into the concept of sexual morality? How does this, you know, you're sort of going to ignore the principles of love and so on in order to have children? To me, that's something very wrong there. But the other thing is that I'm just reflecting on those boys. So yeah, so they were all part of a family, but they weren't. Each child lived in the home or in the direct influence of their mother. So now you have four mothers. And hey, I just want to welcome a new visitor this morning. Maybe
yeah, just want to say, Louise, it's Carol's sister.
Hi, Louise. Welcome. Okay, so we're busy talking still about this whole wives and concubines and things. And what I was actually reflecting on a minute ago was how does this fit into morality? Giving your concubines to get children. And then the other aspect of it is that all of these boys were actually not living with their father as such. They were living with their mothers. And I think the fact that Joseph came out well is that he was living with his father and his mother. There are stories about him actually listening to Jacob, talking about the way God led him, how he fought with Jesus, and all of those stories were the stories and the influence on him as he was going into slavery, and he remembered the God of his father as he had heard about it. And I don't think those influences actually were shared with the other brothers as such. So here Jacob was living with the woman he loved and the children that were part of his family, his actual family. And that to me is an example of how robust the actual plan of God is in marriage. One woman, one husband, children living in a loving relationship. Cecilia?
But Cliff, what does that still say about Jacob as the father of all the other children and not giving them the same upbringing, spiritual upbringing?
He couldn't. How can you bring four women who actually hate each other into one environment and then talk to? It just sounds very messy.
No, it's very difficult. But being the head of the household, he still had a responsibility to the others.
Agreed. Yeah. Anyway, so yeah, let's go to Judah quickly. So Judah has this. Now, yeah, he's not trying to make children, he's just lustful. And he sees this woman and he says, you know what, let's just go and have sex quickly. Yeah, that's an interesting one. Okay, so there's no comment on that.
Well, I think, look, in the defense of the brother's situation, he was looking for comfort, and he got outsmarted.
Who's this? Sorry, just you're talking about Judah now?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, he got outsmarted by his daughter-in-law.
Yeah, okay. So
you have to keep in mind that a woman had a far lower status if she didn't have children. And in their tradition, I think it was even ordained that by God, that if your brother, if he died, you'd be passed on to the next. So there was some complications there. This wasn't exactly a cut and dry situation. And those people did what they needed to do, hey?
Well, yeah, exactly that. So yes, the whole warpedness of all of this, right? And I'll go out on a limb and say it was absolutely cockeyed warpedness. Here is one principle of I must have children, overriding everything else, overriding family structures, overriding morality, allowing promiscuity. I like to stand back and I think, wow, this is so messy, where you have one main thing overriding major principles of life. And I'm sorry, I just find that totally unacceptable. But anyway.
Sorry, because how can one man allow his child to be seen as another man's child just because of tradition?
Exactly.
So you're speaking about morality, but I think that it may be a modern day morality that you have there. The tradition of that time was not a one man, one wife situation. So that's not what they, I think you have to look at where they were and not transpose our view of morality and put it onto them. Their morality was having a few wives. That was where they found themselves. You don't find one man, one wife situation in the Bible. Only really when Jesus came to lay down instruction did he address that situation. And he didn't address a lot of other situations like slavery and women's rights. Those weren't addressed by Jesus.
Okay.
When you speak about morality, just maybe anyway, in my opinion, the
be a bit softer.
Was a bit different back then.
Yeah.
I tend to agree with that. Obviously, context that God, listen, sin is a messy thing. Finished. God has to work with the mess. He has to work with the culture and the environment and what people have allowed. And sometimes he winks at their ignorance. But what's also important is, remember, they know that the Messiah is coming through their line. So they need to make sure that their line stays open. And
that's exactly the cockeyedness that I'm talking about.
But what I want to say is that what was vitally important on a micro level was Judah recognizing his judgment and how evil he really was in judging her as being wicked and being willing to stone her.
Yeah. Okay, so Cher, thanks. That's where I wanted to land up, where in spite of everything that we see and the messy stuff, good prevails and the whole thing gets to back to even kill. Dave, I'll tackle you later on situational morality and principles versus no, I'm teasing. But that alone is a very good discussion. So Cher, thanks for bringing it to where I wanted it to be. So the whole messy situation with Tamar and all of that actually landed up with a very interesting setup, because I don't know if Tamar timed it well, but she was going to make sure she gets a child. And, there are these cycles in women. So I think that she was well aware that she was ready. And then she timed it so that, in that one encounter, there was, her purpose was fulfilled. She got a child. And as you know, or just to remind you, there were actually, Perez was born out of that, and there was twins. So I found it quite interesting that, and I just looked it up, Perez is in Jesus' lineage. And it's Perez, Hezron, Ram, Abinadab, Nashon, and then Salmon, and then Boaz, Obed, Jesse, David. So that was a direct lineage to David out of that encounter between Judah and Tamar. I just want to jump off that into...
Sorry, we have one more comment.
Yeah, Cliff, sorry, before you go on, you mentioned earlier on, did God allow did God cause the famine or allow the famine?
You want to go back there?
The same thing here. Did he allow this, or did he know that it was going to happen? And interestingly, when you trace Jesus' lineage, I think it's four illicit interactions in his line that brings him about. I just find God as I won't say a wicked sense of humor, but he has a sense of humor about how he deals with us and how he interacts with us.
Yeah, very true. Thanks, Dave. I think, and just to go back to the point, God takes any situation and makes it wonderful, actually. So thanks for that. I want to wrap up the lesson by looking at Joseph again, and reflecting on the influences of Joseph. So, starting with his father, Jacob, in Jacob's influence on Joseph, there were two good points as a parent and two bad points as a parent. Can you tell me what the two good points were? Let's start with the good stuff. How did Jacob actually influence Joseph well?
I think he introduced him to the God of their father.
Yeah, so one way or another, he actually communicated what God was like and who God was very well. Cecilia?
I think the other one was that, and Joseph learned this from his father, that you don't just sleep with another woman. Well, I don't know.
There was morality. There was morality. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, you mean by example? It was like, whoa, yeah, this is not good.
So he was a horrible warning to him. Not a great example.
Cliff?
Duduza.
Yes, I think I saw that the father did a good job in teaching the son how to fear God.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah, because I think throughout my reading, I think Joseph feared God more than anything, of which that was a good thing.
You know, yeah, thanks to Duduza. When you read Patriarchs and Prophets on the story of Joseph, she says there that he actually, for a short time, gave himself over into absolute terror and agony of his situation being a slave, sort of thrown into the pit and then sold into slavery. He went through an amazing trauma of fear. And then he remembered, and then he remembered God, the God of his father. Sure.
Someone was also add, Auntie Ellen tells us that at the same time that the Lord sent an angel to Jacob, he sent an angel to Esau to give him a vision of all that Jacob had gone through that was terrible, and how he'd been hurt and harmed, and now how he was a limping man. And it softened his heart that even the men that were with him, they were off to war when they encountered each other. God knew that this encounter was about to happen. But even those men couldn't believe the turnaround in their leader, in Esau. So if I'm sure that Esau would have shared that with Jacob in their reconciliation. And I'm sure that because Joseph was so close to his father would have told him why he's got the limp and what happened and all those things. And I think that would have reminded him that God is kind, God is merciful, and that despite my father's hash-ups and all the other nonsense that has happened, God is a God who can be trusted.
Thank you. So we're running out of time. I didn't really think I would be able to do a whole hour, which is now longer as a lesson study. But the one thing that does come through very clearly is that however it happened, Joseph came to a point where he had absolute and utmost reliance on God. And I think God was also training him through this traumatic process to actually become the sterling character that we actually landed up with. So just quick other reflections on Joseph himself. He utterly relied on God. But I think the other thing that he got from his father, the good thing, was the aspect of being a friendly, outgoing person. When you think of and when you read about Joseph and the character he had, and this is what I believe Jacob gave him. He grew up in a loving environment. He was confident about himself. He was friendly. He was happy to serve. And I think this was the culture that eventually Jacob landed up with. In fact, if you think about him serving 14 years for Rachel, his one objective, you know, you can sense that he got that from his father. So just going through the characteristics of Joseph, the thing that he was diligent, he did things well, he was humble, he was friendly, and he wanted to help others. He had the spirit of helpfulness, and that's what made him likable to Potiphar, to the prison warden. And the amazing thing about Joseph is he rose to the very top of everywhere that he was because he had the character that he had. And I think that this was part of God's plan as well, was to bring somebody of this sterling character into the civilization of Egypt and raise him to the top of that civilization. Joseph must have been hated by other civil servants and other people with ambition in the Egyptian environments, Potiphar's environment, prison environment, and finally in Pharaoh's environment. But I think it was, and Joseph made no, he didn't hide at all that it was God in him and with him that gave him the abilities that he had. In fact, it said, one of these leaders said, I can see God in you. And this was the thing. So I want to wrap up with a final reflection on this whole story. And that is, how does God actually work in our lives? How is God preparing us? I saw the share, you unmuted there. Any comment there?
I think the fact that the story of Joseph takes up so much real estate in the Torah and specifically in Genesis is because he truly loved God. You know, when he got to Potiphar's house, he could have gotten on a horse and camel. He could have left there and gone and sought out his family, but he waited on the Lord. That love is patience to be reunited. When he got to be ruler of Egypt, second in charge, he could have gone and sought his family, but he didn't. He waited on the Lord. And that love is patience, is I see God working patience in him, growing it, developing it, to the point where he now is, he's forgiven his family, but even in patience, he needs to test whether they are actually trustworthy again or not.
Sure.
I mean, it's quite powerful to look at how patience had grown in him and how he, God through that patience used love to bring redemption to that entire family.
Okay. Thank you. That's very valuable insight there. Yeah, so in the last minutes of the lesson, I just want to have us reflect on our lives. So what we see here, and we see elsewhere in the Bible as well, and in other stories and examples of people around us, God definitely is involved in our very fabric of our lives. He wants to and does, where he can and where he allows us, bring his big picture and fulfill his big picture in us. So my question is, you know, how is God actually working in our lives? How is he preparing us? And where we are in the stream of time now is very different to any other stream of time. And that is that, and we believe, I believe, and I think all of us do here, that Jesus coming is imminent. I do believe that Jesus will come while I'm still alive. And then it's a bit of a shocking realization, because I need to be prepared. I need to have the fortitude and the utmost reliance on God to actually go through what we know is coming. And it's not so much about what's coming, but it's about who's coming, and our glorious Savior is coming. But I think we need to ask ourselves for God's influence to prepare us. You know, we think we have troubles in our lives and so on. And when I compare that to the story of Joseph and what he went through, it's like, wow. God really pulled out all the stops on preparing him for the big mission that he had. And I believe that God has a big mission for all of us. Not that we want a big mission, because that's not the thing, but God has a purpose in our lives. And even if it's a mission just to be ready for his coming on in our own lives, and then assist him in helping others to become ready for Jesus coming, especially in this time of the world's history. That's quite awesome, and that's quite something which we should take on as a responsibility in love to God and in response to his salvation invitation and so on. So I don't know if there's any other last comments from anyone else based on what I've just said, but just a last comment. We know that God spoke in dreams and all of that now. We have the Bible, we have various influences in our lives at the moment, which are more than others. But I think it's time for us to actually really, we talk about prayer and we do prayers and we actually pray. And I'd like to invite us to actually listen more. It's strange. I came across this app the other day, which is Fall Asleep in God's Presence. And it plays songs and it softly says verses and stuff. But it's an interesting concept that, you know, to pray is actually coming into God's presence. And I think being in his presence, and I'm talking for myself very strongly as well, we need to be listening. And I think the dreams and the messages specifically from God to us will come through according to his will. So, in fact, I think I'd like to just wrap up the lesson right now and just say a short prayer. Our dear Father in heaven, thank you so much that we had a good discussion this morning. Thank you for the insights that we had, but more so, please, Lord, speak to our hearts individually and in direct messages to us that relate specifically to our lives and our actions and our influence in the world. We thank you, Lord, that we've discovered you, that you've helped us discover you. We thank you so much that you've drawn us close and that we've responded and that we are your children. And I thank you that we have this relationship with you and others, and we pray sincerely that it grows strongly into a flame that then ignites others as well. I pray this, Lord, in Jesus' name, amen.
Thank you so much, Cliff. You know, for all Jacob's faults, etc., with Joseph being the youngest one, you can imagine them having, well, they didn't have TV, so you can imagine them having spent a lot of time talking about God and Jacob imparting his love for God onto Joseph, which is what sustained him through life. But you touched on something earlier on about listening. We do need to listen more to other people's stories as well, listen to them and talk less. And that way we'll also be able to hear God louder.